The Hungarian Grand Prix gave us another great race and I think showed that there are now 3 teams in the mix when it comes to taking victory on a Sunday afternoon, if the teams and drivers perform at their best. On this weekend debrief, we'll take a little look at who can afford to relax a little bit on their summer holiday and who needs to reset and come back stronger for the second half of the season.
Radio check. And you're going to the grid.
Verstappen and Hamilton have crashed out. Max Verstappen, you are the world champion.
Hello and welcome to your F1 Weekend Debrief. Now, as Formula One packs up for the summer break, we've still got plenty to analyse after Sunday's Hungarian Grand Prix. And with me to talk through what we saw in Budapest is endurance racing driver Alex Brundle. Alex, it was a complicated one, wasn't it, Sunday's race?
Complicated for the strategists and also the tyre engineers to work out the best solution to get through the race. So many different strategies tried by teams and drivers, and it all made it all the more interesting for us to watch at home.
Yeah, it really did, and it was Max Verstappen and Red Bull who made all the right decisions on Sunday afternoon. But there was plenty of debate and discussion even leading up to the race on Sunday. What was going on here with Red Bull on those recce laps?
They were so close to the wrong decision. They were initially looking to start on the hard. They went out on the reconnaissance laps on the soft tyre, and these few errors, lock-ups with those cold fronts, actually led them more towards the soft tyre, slightly ironically, as they struggled to get temperature in, started both cars on the soft tyre, which gave them the option to move through the race in the way they did and opened up their strategy completely.
And helped them avoid that hard tyre. Well, let's take a look back at the 70 laps we saw in Hungary. Here's your race recap.
The last Formula One Grand Prix before the summer break. Max Verstappen only 10th. George Russell is at the front of the field.
We're racing in Hungary and George Russell maintains the lead off the line. Lewis Hamilton up to 5th.
Decent start from Max Verstappen as well. Russell dropping the Ferraris.
And it's Leclerc now on the back of his teammate.
Max Verstappen has got a great run on Fernando Alonso and he's ahead of him. That's a bold move to the inside.
That's another place gain. Verstappen 5th.
Still got a great chance of winning this Grand Prix.
Leclerc, by carrying on for a few more laps, is ahead of his teammate.
It wasn't a great last lap from Russell.
He's under big pressure from Leclerc. He is defending this race lead as if his life depends on it.
Dives to the outside and the grandstands erupt as Charles Leclerc leads here.
A brilliant move. Verstappen has gone aggressive.
Undercut attempt for Red Bull.
Charles Leclerc to go on to the hard tyre.
Wow, that's brave based on how it's been going with everybody else.
George Russell is behind Verstappen.
He's going to be all over the back of that Ferrari.
Oh, he's in huge trouble, Leclerc. He's got no grip at all.
They go wheel to wheel.
Easy for Verstappen. Oh, Verstappen spun.
This Grand Prix takes another twist.
Max appears to have got it back under control.
Leclerc's just got that sinking feeling.
Hamilton's on a charge.
Get out of the way, he's saying. Up into the podium places. Max Verstappen from 10th on the grid comes home to win.
That is right up there with your best. Unbelievable.
We would have thought when we woke up we were going to win the race.
It was a busy race, so let's take a look at the data. And Alex, let's start by looking at the race plot. This shows Max Verstappen, of course, taking the race win and making some great strategy decisions.
After a difficult qualifying, they had to nail both the pace of the car and the strategy. Here is Max Verstappen's line here in the solid blue. Gap to leader moving down the screen, and then laps, of course, moving across the bottom. You can see several key moments for Max Verstappen. Firstly, one of the earlier cars to pit right at the start of the race. He undercut both Ferraris, who were forced to pit early off their mediums to cover him. But the moment where he took that critical lead of the race was here. The second undercut onto his second set of medium tyres. A sequence of quicker laps here while the others were still out late in that second stint were where he was able to pass critically George Russell, and then of course forcing Ferrari to cover as he pitted onto a newer, faster set of tyres and forcing them to take that hard tyre where he was able to pass Charles Leclerc. You see where the lines cross on track and then move out into the lead of the race. Sainz and Lewis Hamilton, of course, had to pit out of his way towards the end of the race, and then giving him a healthy margin despite having a little moment towards the end of the race.
King of the 360 spins, isn't he? Well, he was masterful, and I think Red Bull obviously leading the way and controlling the race, but the undercut was incredibly powerful as well, perhaps more so than we expected.
Undercut really, really powerful for Max, but critically I think it's more about Red Bull grabbing the race by the horns and getting out there, making those pit stops, and then trusting Max to take this medium compound tyre, what is quite a long distance through to the end of the race after pushing on it quite early on. It was a very well executed race, which shows their experience in challenging at the front of the field, shows their championship capability, and a very impressive strategic and driving performance.
When conversely Ferrari perhaps aren't quite there. If we now move to their strategy and their decisions, I want to go back to the beginning of the weekend, because if we look here, this is practice, and something does stand out for Ferrari. I don't see any white, which is of course the hard tyre usage. So why did they go for that hard tyre during the race?
Neither Ferrari nor Red Bull have used the hard tyre throughout practice, maybe trying to save them for the race. You would think they would know enough about it from watching the other teams run on it, but remember, there are only a couple of sets of those. You get a go on one maybe at the start of FP1 and don't really get a feel for it, but it was a massive gamble putting the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc on that unknown hard tyre. And although there were many strategies as you moved through the race, it's really something that they were forced into.
Well, let's take a look at all of the strategies that the field used on Sunday afternoon. There were many ways to get to the checkered flag, weren't there?
There really were. I mean, everything from the winning strategy, the soft, medium, which I think turned into the optimal. But when you look down into the midfield, drivers and teams even trying to one-stop onto the hard, which, yes, it got the Alpine points, but resulted in a pretty disastrous stint for anyone who was on the hard. But when we look at the race stage by stage, and we think through how this battle played out at the front, it's really interesting to see the decisions that were made. Here we are on lap 21. We've got Charles Leclerc out there in the lead. Max Verstappen has just pitted off the soft tyre onto the medium. And I think this is one of those moments where Ferrari were a little jumpy on the pit wall, perhaps over-concerned about the lack of ability to pass drivers, the overtake risk or the track position risk. They are just pitting Charles Leclerc off a set of mediums that could have gone way further here into the race, and perhaps overreacting to the undercut of Max Verstappen with both Ferraris.
Well, they then pitted onto the medium, as you say, and then let's move on a little further into the race. Lap 39. So Leclerc in the lead at this point, but then about to take the hard tyre.
Well, the same thing's going to happen again. Look how far back Max Verstappen is at this point, having just pitted onto the second set of mediums, put the same pressure through the field again. And Leclerc is just about to pit again to cover off the undercut again. Critically, though, at this point, we're only on lap 39. He's going to have to take the hard tyre, and they have the information from the Alpines, from other cars that have run the hard tyre, that they're going to find it difficult. I think this is a real strategic error, and quite jumpy from Ferrari, showing that they're really worried about being undercut and don't believe that Leclerc is going to be able to pass Max Verstappen on track if they run long and then put the soft on somewhere around here.
Yeah, jumpy. You've mentioned that word a couple of times. I think it was a little too reactive, perhaps not focusing on their own race. So there we go again. That is exactly how it all played out and where people ended up. And of course, the Ferraris P4 and P6, with Charles Leclerc having to jump back onto that soft tyre towards the end because the hard just wasn't working. Yeah,
it really fell apart then at that point for Charles Leclerc. And the impressive stint then is this one from Verstappen on the medium as the fuel bleeds away. Really showed Ferrari what was possible. This really the stint that Charles Leclerc should have been putting in here to take him through to this soft tyre, to be able to challenge Max Verstappen at the end. not able to do so. The move should have happened on track, and realistically we were denied, I think, a bit of a battle between Leclerc and Verstappen as that Ferrari challenge fell apart.
Well, interesting you say that. Let's take a look then. What if Charles hadn't taken on the hards at that point in the race? What does the data tell us?
So the solid line is the strategy that Leclerc took, pitting here onto the hard tyre and then of course having to pit again onto the soft and having decent pace. We've built, based from his simulated pace, well, his real pace on the soft tyre and then his pace in the first stint, what that might have looked like if he'd stayed on the medium and done that stint Verstappen managed to do towards the end of the race. Here it is in dotted red, and as you can see, he would have pitted back behind Max Verstappen but then had new soft tyres to challenge him at the end. We would have had a great battle in here between Verstappen on an old set of mediums and Leclerc on a newer set of softs, but alas, it wasn't to be.
Denied another great battle between Charles and Max. So the what if not looking good for Ferrari in their debrief this week, I imagine?
Realistically, no. They've made an error there and they'll look back at it and think that they had a car to potentially win the race. Yes, there's a little bit of guesswork and conjecture in this, but the facts are undeniable that this pit stop, where they overreacted to Verstappen, was an error on Ferrari's part.
And Matteo Binotto, the team principal at Ferrari, saying it wasn't really the strategy that let them down, it was more the pace of the car. But if we wind back through the season, of course, there have been other strategic decisions that haven't gone their way. I'm thinking back to Monaco here in the wet, where they brought Charles in and put him onto the intermediates from the full wets, and that really should have been a longer stint onto the slicks. And there we go, a double stack for Ferrari, and of course that costing Charles Leclerc the win in Monaco.
Really seems like they've got themselves into a spiral of error in terms of the strategy. They lose track position one week and then end up so afraid of losing track position that they make a different error the next week. There was also the issue they had in Silverstone, not pitting under that virtual safety car with Charles and leaving him in the position again of being in the driver's pen going, we'll have to have a look at it, we'll have to talk it through, we'll see after the debrief. Here we have it then, Carlos Sainz in under the virtual safety car, Charles Leclerc heading on round. They didn't get both drivers in and naturally Charles lost massive track position.
Yeah, a disappointing first half of the season. I think so many more points on the table for Charles Leclerc in particular. I think Ferrari are going to need to use this summer break to their advantage to come back stronger for the second half of the season. And talking of breaks, we're going to take one now. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back to your F1 Weekend Debrief. We've been taking a look at the strategic decisions taken by Red Bull and Ferrari, and now it seems like Mercedes are in the mix for victory as well at the weekends, with George Russell taking his maiden pole position in Formula One on Saturday afternoon, to the shock, I think, of many people in the paddock.
12 minutes on the clock. This could be anyone's session.
That's the fastest lap of the weekend, Carlos Sainz.
Russell, look at that. 1:17.9 from George Russell.
Russell's first sector is rapid. It's on a par with Carlos Sainz.
Sainz has improved in the third sector. He improves his time, 1:17.4. Can George Russell do it here in Hungary? He goes pole!
Wow. Where did that come from?
A fantastic job by George Russell to take his maiden pole position with a car that perhaps people didn't think was possible of taking pole position. But let's look over to Sunday's race and see how the pace that they showed on Saturday translated to race pace. And we can see Russell and Hamilton here on the graph, and also the tyre strategies they used, different across both drivers.
Yeah, so you've got Hamilton in red and George Russell in blue. Quicker is lower, and then the tyres across the bottom of the screen. Lewis Hamilton with that DRS failure in qualifying, starting further back, of course, and went on to the medium tyre to run longer potentially at the start. You can see that Hamilton was slightly slow. He's moving through the traffic, but when he clears this moment, this is him passing Lando Norris, incidentally, his pace then really joins the pace of George Russell at the front of the field in the other Mercedes, despite being on the soft tyre. When you look towards where that differential is flipped the other way around, right at the end of the race, Hamilton much faster on the soft tyre, with George on some, understandably actually, older mediums. So I think it is Lewis Hamilton who is the faster of the two Mercedes, especially through the middle stint as well, over the race distance. But critically, he's able to manage that soft tyre when he's on low fuel at the end much better than George Russell is able to manage it when he's on higher fuel at the start, which was the great difference between the two of them.
So perhaps we'll see Mercedes trying to avoid starting a race on a soft tyre, given the car's a bit heavy and not using it to its optimum performance.
I think it's the way they've split the cars and just a case-by-case scenario with the fact that it's obviously loaded up that soft tyre, heavy on fuel, difficult in terms of the track condition and maybe overheated the surface. We also saw George Russell under a little bit of pressure from behind through those early stints, but really impressive stints from Lewis Hamilton, especially when he came charging through on that set of soft tyres at the end. It would have been great to see what Hamilton could have done if he didn't have such a difficult qualifying and start so far down the grid.
Well, I think he and his team boss, Toto Wolff, thought that he was on for potentially pole or at least a front row start alongside George. So what if Lewis hadn't have had that problem with his DRS flap? Could he have maybe taken the race win?
It's an interesting one, and this is Lewis's pace. You can see him in the green dots through the middle of the race here. Yes, if he'd have started where George Russell had started, theoretically, he could have taken victory. There would have been quite an interesting battle, both with his teammate, who he obviously battled with at the end of the race in real terms. You can see in terms of where they actually ended up with these bigger dots for Hamilton's real-life performance, challenging George Russell at the end. Great race that was, too, between the two of them. They would have had a great big old battle with Charles Leclerc as well in here. I think in real terms, all of this battling would have prevented him actually overcoming Max Verstappen at the end, but certainly they would have been in the hunt. I think he probably would have ended up about where he ended up anyway, but it might have been a better race to watch.
Yeah, I think we've missed out on a load of battles from what our data, our speculation tells us. But of course, he started in the midfield, and there were some other battles in the midfield that were interesting and you needed to keep an eye on as well. So let's take a look then at Esteban Ocon in the Alpine and Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin. Different tyre strategies. Esteban Ocon, we mentioned the Alpines using that hard tyre. What does the data tell us here?
I think it really does show us, and it's more information that the teams at the front could have leaned on, how bad the hard tyre was. You can see as soon as Ocon throws it on, his line jumps upwards. He is much slower through the stint on the hard tyre. Monster stint on the medium from Stroll. Very impressive stint indeed, and it's more data the teams at the front can lean on. It was a reasonably good day, wasn't it, from Aston Martin? But this shows how tricky and weird the strategy was in terms of those tyres when they're all trying to box into their gaps in the midfield, having to make strategies work that weren't necessarily the optimum.
Yeah, great to see battles up and down the field. And of course, Lance Stroll also having to deal with the news that he will have a new teammate in 2023. Of course, Sebastian Vettel announcing that he'll be retiring at the end of the season. I think it caught many of us by surprise.
It's weird to think about it, that he'll be not here with us next year anymore. So, but you know, it's obviously sad on one side, but I'm happy for him that he's taken that decision, that he now gets a chance to spend so much time with his family.
You know, very proud of how he stood up for what he's believed in for others, even at the cost of himself. And I see him as such a legend of our sport, and when we talk about legends, there's not many that I count as legends, if I'm being honest. But he's at the top of that.
Such big news in the paddock in Hungary, wasn't it, Alex? Seb retiring, and I think he'll be remembered both for his antics on track, but also off track. But his announcement has really kick-started silly season, and the driver market is wide open. We do know a few drivers who are locked in for 2023, don't we?
Silly season blending with the mid-season break, and it's kicked off already with, of course, the movement across from Alpine to Aston Martin of Fernando Alonso. Alonso, which was a very interesting move, considered an interesting one by many in the paddock, but he's kicked off a chain of events whereby there are several drivers that could move, and that's left a big question mark over who's going to fill the rest of the midfield.
And we can see Oscar Piastri's face there.
The Alpine Academy driver, the open seat, they've got to justify that Academy's existence, and indeed he has earned it, becoming Formula 2 champion.
Question mark at McLaren. Now, a lot of people will think, well, Daniel Ricciardo said, I will be in Formula 1 in 2023, and that will be with McLaren, but I think there's still conversations around that seat.
We know he's contracted, but those conversations continue around whether he'll stay on at McLaren.
Absolutely, and his performance on track obviously affecting those conversations, I imagine, too. And if we look further down the order, Alfa Romeo's still looking for a second driver for next year. Will Joe stay? Has he done enough? Or what about Teo Pourchaire? And then Mick Schumacher as well. He's not a certainty to be at Haas. And even Yuki Tsunoda with AlphaTauri. You'd think the link up there might continue. And then Williams. I mean, how many drivers do they need to choose from? They've got a lot of options open to them.
Yeah, half the Formula 2 field queued outside the Williams factory through the summer break. But it's a time of the year when all of these drivers, both the youngsters in Formula 2 and those wishing to stake a claim on their seat, either new or old, for next year, have to perform now through the end of the season to try to nail down their job for 2023.
Absolutely, and it's always a distraction, is it, those conversations off track. So they're going to have to focus on what to do in Belgium and beyond, but also have those conversations to make sure they're in the best position possible. So if we look ahead to Belgium, who's going to go well there?
Well, you would consider that Mercedes are actually moving forward in terms of form. We saw this fantastic qualifying lap from George Russell last time out to put himself on the eventual podium. But we also saw how much difficulty they had in wet conditions in Hungary. I think it's going to be so condition dependent. And remember just how wet it was last time we were in Spa, Rosanna.
Absolutely. Well, George Russell, of course, off the back of a pole position in Hungary. He'll be looking to back that up. But it will be interesting to see how the Mercedes fare. And, of course, you have to throw into the mix some serious conditions. A lot of decision-making going to make or break some people's races in Spa.
Absolutely. I mean, it's always a place that has its own microclimate. I really do hope, though, for everybody's sake, we get a little bit more racing on the board on what is one of, indisputably, one of the best circuits in the world.
Yeah, definitely. I don't want to be in the pit lane interviewing drivers. I want to be watching them out on track. Well, Formula 1 takes a short break now as we head into the summer holidays, but we will be back after the Belgian Grand Prix to discuss everything we see in Spa. Alex, thank you so much for your time. Always great to have you on the show. So from Alex and from me, it is time to say goodbye.
This is the Belgian Grand Prix, some of the most famous tarmac in Formula 1 history. And it's lights out and away we go! And it's the bravest of the brave that go into 44 laps at Spa. Fernando Alonso goes over the top! It's the Belgian Grand Prix for Lewis Hamilton. Max Verstappen takes victory.
Simply lovely.
He's got his last one.